And before we open it up to questions, I was very struck by a quote from you. You said, "The greatest thing about what I do is that I'm in a position to change lives. It's the most incredible platform for influence that you could imagine." Help us imagine what's that like.
Well, it's
for
still
someone whose spheres of influence and whose reach and impact is so diverse. Policy, education, impacting daily lives. What's that experience like?
Well, I would say this. I think everyone in this room has experienced it to some degree. Because what I learned over the years in my 35,000 interviews with people, and still counting, is that there's a common denominator in the human experience. That whether I was talking to a convict, I interviewed a father in prison who'd murdered his 2 daughters. I interviewed a group of women in Texas who'd all murdered their children. I've talked to victims of abuse. I've talked to people who've been through traumatic circumstances in their life, people who've had great victories in their life. I've talked to almost every celebrity you could imagine. And at the end of every single one of those interviews, in one form or another, each of them said this: "Was I okay? Was that okay?" I finished interviewing 5 men who all admitted to being child molesters and told in graphic detail how they lured children and seduced children. And it was really pretty profound, I would say, compelling. At the end of it, they said, "Was that okay?" At the end of Beyoncé dancing on stage in all of her Beyoncé-ness, she turned to me.
Later, right?
Yes.
You're going to do it later for us.
She turned to me and said, "Was that okay?" So what I learned in all of those thousands of interviews is that there is a common denominator in our human experience. And when I go into any interview, no matter how intimidated I might be or how, oh my gosh, I've never talked to this person before, I know that that's the line of truth that's running through. Everybody wants to know, did you hear me? And did what I say matter? And that's in your own personal relationships, that's with your children, that's every argument you've ever had is really about, are you hearing me? I'm sure somebody's actually said those words in this room. You don't hear me, are you hearing me? So fundamentally, the desire to be heard, the desire to be validated, the desire to know that what you're doing is meaningful in the world is something that we all hold for ourselves. Just this past week, on my network-owned, I do something called Super Soul Sunday, and I was interviewing Carolyn Mace, who wrote a book called Anatomy of Spirit. And what's really exciting for me is that we were able to broadcast that not just on the cable platform, but to also blast it around the world. So we simulcast it around the world. So all around the world, people are tweeting in, thousands of people at the same time. And she said something that really hit a nerve. I knew it would hit a nerve with everybody because it hit a nerve with me. She was talking about how most people lead their lives following a course that is not their own. And that unless you can find the course that is truly your own, you will remain off course. And she was talking about how so many women betray themselves, and that when you betray yourself in relationships, regardless of what those relationships are, that you are no different than the person who hurt you. Now, that's just a simple little sentence. When you betray yourself, you're no different than the person who hurt you. Most of us in this room are cognizant of that. We're aware of that. But there's a whole world of people who are not. So what comes back to me is all these people who are tweeting, "Oh my God, I never thought of it that way before." That to me is the purest validation, because the reason why I wanted to do that show is so that people would feel and be able to discover a path to better themselves, a way to see themselves differently. And that one little phrase, when you betray yourself, you become no different than the people who hurt you, opened the door for that. So I, in that way, am validated because I'm very clear about what my purpose on earth is. I'm very clear that the work that I do on television is just a way of me manifesting myself as a vessel and a vehicle for the larger energy that I call God, for the larger universal purpose that I call God. That's what it is for me.